Hello, and welcome to Off the Shelf Reviews.
I'm Jess.
And I'm Gary. And today we're going to take a look at Harbinger Down, which came out in 2015. Written and directed by Alec Gillis and produced by Tom Woodruff Jr. This is a film that came off the back of the Thing prequel. It was Amalgamated Dynamics that did the special effects work on that prequel movie. Now, this team has worked on some fantastic movies in the past, including Aliens, Tremors, Starship Troopers, Mortal Kombat doing Goro, Evolution, Death Becomes Her. They won Oscars for some of their practical work in film. And when they did the Thing prequel, once the work was done, Universal looked at their prosthetic work and said, yeah, we're going to CGI all over it. A few years later, Amalgamated Dynamics released their test material onto YouTube, which got an overwhelming response because people wanted practical effects in that Thing prequel, which they didn't get. So this team put together a Kickstarter, and they managed to raise over $350,000 to front the special effects on a special effects-laden movie, promising no CGI.
They used a little, but I mean, it was predominantly. But it was only to touch up and remove wires. I think
that's correct.
Yeah. It was all complementary CGI. So
which is an absolute given.
Yeah. It was fine model work. I know. I felt the tentacles. I'm getting out of myself, but there's a lot of things to pick apart of this film. The tentacles got over the top, like just doing this,
just flapping.
Yeah, it's just like I was just flapping, and she jumps out of a window or rolls down a corridor, and they grabbed him. I'm just like, they're not very believable. And that's the problem. I think I don't know what the actual budget. We couldn't work out what the actual budget for this was. We know they had earned a chunk of cash on Kickstarter, but honestly, it just
yeah, the budget definitely feels lacking, even though it is a low-budget movie.
It's a low-budget movie. It's not like it's better than made for TV.
It's the fact that this film is massively inspired by John Carpenter's The Thing and Ridley Scott's Alien, with maybe a dash of Aliens in there as well.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a complementary film to those two, is in, if you've seen either of those two films, you might enjoy this one just a little bit more. It kind of raises it from its generic
But then again, you could go the other way, which again, it's the lack of originality, you might argue. I don't know, it depends how you come at it from. It's a mixed bag.
Oh, it really is. Well, I mean, the film opens up with a very special date, June 25th, 1982, which is where we see the satellite falling from Earth. Oh, sorry, the shuttle falling
the shuttle
from Earth.
With the Russian cosmonaut.
That date is actually the release date of John Carpenter's The Thing.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of Easter eggs in this film, and I'll try and point them out as they crop up in the film.
Yeah, they're not shy of admitting what they're
homaging.
But I will add that whole sequence felt unnecessary, and this is the problem with this film. The whole main opening just feels unnecessary, and this goes for...
Well, I would say the thing falling from space is kind of necessary. You want to know where it's come from at least, maybe.
No, that you start with having a mystery.
It's how the thing starts, So.
Yeah, well, I suppose we're playing homage, but again, I think it doesn't help the plot, and the plot in itself is a complicated, woven heap of gibberish.
Explain this. That's some pretty fancy gack for a crabbing trip.
So the story follows two students and their university professor, and they are heading out aboard the Harbinger to go and do some research about whales when they discover the object that fell from the sky at the beginning of the film. What they unleash or unthaw is a parasite like the Thing creature, which slowly mutates and starts to consume the crew and create lots of hideous, horrible monsters. And it's down to our struggling survivors to figure out what the creature is and try to survive this nightmare.
There's some parasites that produce chemicals that liquefy the bodies of their hosts.
Palovic, devourer of sailors.
I love the films it's referencing, but I don't love this film. I love Lance Henriksen.
Lance Henriksen is always amazing, and he often or not times makes unbearable movies watchable just because of his presence.
Yeah, he clearly loves making films, and I'm afraid they don't give him Hollywood doesn't give him the roles that I'd love him to give him, because, I think older actors always have a trouble finding those roles, because most films are about young heroes, shall we say.
Well, Lance Henriksen in this plays the Harbinger sea captain, Graf. Filling out the cast, we have Camille Balsamo, who plays Sadie, his granddaughter. We have Matt Winston, who plays Stephen, which is the college professor. We have Reed Collins, who plays Bowman, kind of like the ship's first mate. We have Winston James Francis, who plays Big G, or Grumpy, as he's called. We have Miller Bjorn, who plays Svet. Michael Estim, who plays Doc. And we have Giovanni Samuels, who plays Ronell. There's a few other bit characters, but they get killed off quick, so we don't bother with them.
Yeah, well, the problem is there's a lot of underdeveloped characters as a whole in this.
Yes.
That's the script as a whole, almost. The only people that get any real story time is Sadie and Pop Pop, Lance Henriksen and his granddaughter. They are okay. I mean, the problem is they're paying for what they get. They've clearly paid for Lance Henriksen, and everyone else sort of must have been on the cheap, because the main actress, if you're a gore whore, this film isn't for you. There's not much blood. I mean, this is the thing. By the end of it, Sadie, I thought about this when I don't want to jump straight to the end. There was no blood on her by the end sequence.
No.
She was immaculate. It could have been from the first scene of the
To
film.
the end scene, you couldn't tell the difference.
No.
That she'd just been through hell.
Yeah, there'd been a night of mayhem and anarchy and people dying.
Well, I mean, this film, it takes a good 35, 45 minutes before anything of real note actually happens.
And that's amazing that nobody gets any real character development. I mean, there's like, oh, they're friends, and then they're not friends, and there's like, oh, they've clearly been celestial for ages. And then it turns out Svetlana, the Russian, who we'll get into that in a bit, but she's not been on the ship that long, because it's revealed that she's joined them only recently.
Right.
But there's kind of interactions that make it appear like they're friends for ages, and then
Exactly.
it just
It's
seems
awkward. It's going for that same camaraderie as the crew
Nostromo.
aboard the Nostromo,
Yeah.
and the scientists and civilians at the base in John Carpenter's The Thing. But it doesn't have that chemistry about it.
No, and
none of them have what you would believe as real interactions with each other.
No.
There is a sequence that's not too bad, and that is when they're kind of teasing and winding up the college professor, because he is outraged that he's not been given full exclusive rights to their salvage after they fished this thing up out of the water. I'll just throw in another Easter egg here for you, is that when Sadie is going out to do research on the whales, the case that she opens up has bio level 426. That's LV 426. Yeah, another Aliens reference.
I know.
And we've also seen the bobbing head things as well from Alien. It's somewhere in the
there were
on the
two
ship.
of them dipping to a cup, yeah.
But she was the one who found the thing. They bring up this big block of ice and start hacking away at it with axes. They reveal that there is an astronaut inside, a Russian astronaut, and that he was carrying some kind of strange cargo. But they dump it all in the hold whilst they argue about who has rights to it. Graf is the one who just says to Professor Stephen that it was his granddaughter's find. She owns the rights to it, though it's staying in the cargo hold until we get back to mainland, which really, really upsets him.
Yes.
We have some kind of wandering around, some character building moments where Sadie eventually grabs Svet and they go and explore the wreckage. And they can see that it's thawing out quite quickly and that there was some other unexplained things in there. Doesn't really lead to anything. And it's really Stephen who gets irate still and stresses out and eventually goes down there to see the wreckage for himself, only to figure out that the cosmonaut has now left.
Yes, he's vanished into the ship, and the goop thing begins, which is there's goop in the ship, which eventually forms into the monster. Now, the monster itself it's revealed quite early on, because she takes a sample from the cosmonaut, is a tardigrade. It's a microorganism, which basically is one of the toughest entities on this planet. You can freeze them. The DNA strands of the creature itself can be split apart, but once they thaw out, they stick themselves back together. They can survive in super high heat and low temperature. an incredibly durable creature, so you'd have to work. I don't know. Mutating anything's difficult, but something that can put itself back together, it just seems odd. And I mean, I get why they chose it for the indestructible nature of it, but the whole tentacles and the goop thing, it's just very odd around the ship.
It makes you wonder then, though, was it something that the Russians created, or was it something that mixed poorly with something they found in space? Because they explain that this thing landed on the moon.
Yeah.
So it makes you think, did they sample something from the moon which mixed badly with those?
Well,
it's not explained, but you kind of need to make some kind of jumps in logic, maybe, to figure out where this creature actually comes from.
Yeah, it is all in all very odd. And there's a lot of jumps in logic in this film.
Well, things get kind of shaken up just a little bit when Steven starts acting peculiarly.
Yes.
He rushes off once the rest of the crew are trying to figure out who moved the body, and he kind of has a fit, like a mental breakdown on deck. When they drag him back down, I mean, I'm just going to cut back to that bit again because the camera work for this sequence was awful. The camera panned all the way around maybe 2 or 3 times before coming straight back
if
in.
If we're going to talk about cinematography, this whole film is a bit of a car wreck. Because it feels like we said, this is made by predominantly special effects
people,
guys.
yeah.
The cinematography doesn't work for most of it. I mean, the models are very nice, and some of the shots on those are nice. Like the boat model, because that's obviously a model.
Going through the ice, yeah.
That all looks lovely. But when you get close up to it, they hold too long on certain effects. And the way you work with any effect, be it CGI, we talked about this earlier in other film reviews, with if you have a piece of CGI that isn't great, you want to kind of cut away from it. You want the money shots where you're going to spend all your cash to make sure that looks great. And you want to make... I mean, they don't use much blood in this, which may sound really pedantic, and as I said, it's not necessary in films, but blood does something very simple. You can mimic blood realistically.
Yeah.
And it seems to work on the human brain. You can trick us. But when we get to the Steven shot, where you see his thing, the whole he starts to be torn to pieces through 3 arms shoot from his back. It's pretty awesomely gruesome.
It's really, really effective, and you can see that they're clearly mimicking the alien chestburster sequence.
Yes, just backburster, sort of. Yeah. But they hold on it too long, and it's too grand. Because, like I said, there's no blood, which is weird.
No, but the things coming out of its back are spraying this kind of liquid ooze into the air, and it splashes Doc right in the face.
Yeah.
And a bit of continuity. I don't know whether it's implied continuity or not, but in the very next shot, he's completely clean, like he wasn't sprayed at all. And I was like, either he ate it, he wiped it all away, or it just absorbed into him super quickly.
Yeah, or they forgot.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's inherently the problem with this film. It just... They don't show things like that, like it vanishing into his skin. You need to foreshadow things, and I don't think... that's the problem. I don't feel like there was a threat. I didn't feel like the horror aspects. I mean...
I thought it was pretty damn horrific. Like, and one of the shots, I couldn't even tell the switch from the actor to the puppet when the camera's on his back and he's gyrating away and all of his skin changes. I was like, that was... freakish, horrific, disgusting, and exactly what I would expect in a body horror thing homage.
But I felt they held the shot too long. I mean, there's a certain point where your brain can disbelieve for so long, at least for me, where I'm like, okay, that looks a bit like a guy or a rubber suit, and I'm like,
I would say that,
that if they need to either play with the lighting, steady cam, going wobbly cam isn't a good idea. They do it randomly through the whole film as well. They do a lot of random shaky cam. It starts in the second after you get the shuttle. They're in the car in Alaska. There's a load of shaky cam of
this found footage cam,
which is just out of place. I mean, you can switch camera styles through a film, but if it serves a good purpose, but that did not serve any good purpose. It was trying to give the black college girl more purpose. Her whole character was underwritten. Yeah. I mean, I was just like, why is she here? You could have not had that character. You could have had the professor and the young
I'm
Sadie,
assuming, yeah.
which made sense because Sadie was related to the captain. I mean, and like she's just mean to the young black guy. That's the only thing I really remember her being in the opening 10-15 minutes of the film.
Research grants are nothing but white people's government cheap.
Yeah, and something tells me that you don't vote and you sure as hell don't pay taxes.
What?
Okay, knock it off.
When you're watching this film, you're just like, who's going to die, and in which order, and how? That's the type of film this is. And
No,
so I'm like,
that's the
you
problem,
are just a
but it-
fodder.
no, but-
Whereas at least in Alien and The Thing, you actually
Yeah.
care about those
Well,
characters.
yeah, that's the issue with it. There's a certain type of horror where you get these kind of kill chain. Let's just call it for that. It's just like, oh, they're all going to die. How are they going to die? Maybe the last one will stop this, or somehow stop this. And that sort of is this film. I mean, you can criticize Alien for that argument, but the character acting, the narrative twists and turns, the actual script and character development and the character arcs, there's more meaning to it all.
Whereas in here, it really isn't.
Yeah.
And, and going in contrast to Steven's death, I think it's Roland, who is the engineer, who's down there all on his own, the entire film, for what he's in it for, doesn't have a single line of dialogue, but he hears something. And I do like the creepy shot where he's leaning out of his bunk, and you see the blob just underneath a pipe. I was like, it's well lit, it's well framed, the creature is pretty disgusting. But, I at first I was like, was that CGI tentacles that lashed out at the screen? I'm like, oh no, it's probably... I think they filmed it at a different frame rate. So
Yeah.
it just has that weird alien kind of effect, which
Yeah.
makes your brain go, was it CGI? Was that stop motion?
Some of the
What was
tentacles-
it? It was
yeah.
so fast that you don't really care too much. It just takes you off guard. It is a little bit shocking, I guess. But then what's annoying is that Roland gets dragged off, and there's an explosion, a bloody explosion sound, and you see a shot of blood.
We talking about a health risk here?
But I was like, what actually happened? Was he dragged under a pipe? Was he squeezed through something?
Yeah, squeezed underneath the
valves, the engine parts?
axis. Yeah, I mean,
But it wasn't very clear because it was literally just a few frames and it was over. So I mean, it's a big
yeah,
contrast
this
to
film
Stevens.
is not overly gory. I mean, it has a lot of prosthetic work and tentacles, and a bit of makeup, but there's no real gore. And that's where I felt like blood effects were lacking. I mean, the deaths were not memorable.
No,
And
they
that
weren't.
the bursters from his back, sure, that looked cool, but it was more of a creature feature moment than a horrible character death. And you didn't care about the professor. He was annoying for the whole film. There was
Yes.
no redeeming. That's the thing. In Alien, you cared about everybody, and nobody in that film.
No one was annoying. Like the same for John
Yeah.
Carpenter's The Thing. No one's really annoying. Whereas the professor character in this was written in such a way that you can't wait for him to get offed
And
because
the-
he's so aggravating.
And you feel a lot with the rest of the cast. Now, there's a point we kind of need to discuss, which is the plot contrivances, which is the whole Russian subplot.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that part.
Well, we roll on, obviously, from where the professor dies. And that sort of set you in motion. And that's quite a way into the film. And this is...
It's about the hour mark into the film where it's like, okay, it's time to split up and try and figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And Graf and Atka go below decks to find out what happened to Roland. And we see the Russian cosmonaut has been tied up by a great big bug-like creature. Atka kind of panics a little bit, gets pulled in by the tentacles, and freezes his own arm off. And gets pulled away. And I was like, again, we don't see what happens to him immediately, but just a little bit later on, when they're still exploring the ship, they find his legs sticking out of what looks like a shark mouth with all of its teeth that get revealed through these, these translucent gums. And we see this great big creature that's, built into the ship slowly consuming him.
We're gonna need a bigger bucket.
It's interesting they kind of do rip on these other films. And again, it's made by people who clearly love the horror genre, which again, I don't want to be dicking on their hard work all the time, but it does feel that this film... It was the most funded horror film, I think, or film on Kickstarter, one of the most funded projects ever. And it clearly is a labour of love for these guys. And there is some people who are very hyper fanatical about miniature work versus CGI. There is a lesson in kind of working with live action miniatures, I think, especially in certain scenarios like the boats. And again, it saves you having to actually have live sets at sea. But I will add that meant I noticed constantly the ship had no rocking. They're at sea, and there's absolutely the professor gets a bit seasick at one point.
And Sadie kind of wobbles in a couple of scenes early on, but then almost immediately afterwards, everything is just still.
Yes, because
I don't know whether they're
locked in ice, but it's not an icebreaker ship. Again,
no.
I can't turn off that part of my brain for this film because it annoys me so much at certain other points. My brain starts picking at everything else. I'm like, yeah, but that's not an icebreaker. You don't want to get locked in ice. If you get a ship locked in ice, it's doomed. So where it was and it's near a kind of ice pack where it's crabbing, but it's none of that makes any sense. There's a lot of this film that doesn't make any sense, which is a really big problem. Because when a film has problems, you don't want to further hemorrhage it by having convoluted and slightly nonsensical plot lines. And this film has loads of them.
Well, let's go to your favourite one. Let's talk about
Svetlana. She's a Russian agent deployed to a fishing vessel, maybe if they find a Russian shuttle.
What the hell? This is almost over with anyway. This lunar lander was lost in 1982. Since we got signal, consultants have been posing as fishermen on trawlers. Soviets tried to create cosmonaut resistant to the radiation. Didn't work out so well.
You could have told us. We could have thrown that thing back!
That was not the plan.
Because you needed a gun-wielding Russian evil agent in the middle of a monster movie.
It was the most awful plot twist that I could think of putting in this film.
Her Russian accent was obviously great.
I mean, she's clearly a double agent.
Yes, it was always... It was terrible. I mean, and the problem, she's like, yes, we've been infiltrating all the ships at sea with sleeper agents. We don't want to risk your whole Russian vessel. I'm like, wait, none of that makes any sense. You could just find it and go, it's dangerous, bin it. Because it wasn't like...
She explains that they know what the creature is and that she's now getting combat data on how effective it is on a ship on a small scale. I'm like, is this a Resident Evil villain?
Yeah, it did feel like Umbrella Corp was online. It's just like, this is a very good idea. It couldn't possibly be the worst investment in history.
We find out that she's planted explosives throughout the ship and that there's a submarine 30 minutes away from pickup.
Which is, again, hugely not important because that plotline gets dropped immediately after her horrible death.
Right.
Her monster looks good, though. But
well, yeah, while she's got them all pinned down, the surviving group are just like, well, what if we all were to rush you? Like, you can't shoot us all. But at the same time, we, as an audience, we're privy to this tentacle thing slowly emerging out of the pipe. Once they decide to try and rush her, the creature goes for an attack. She tries to shoot it. Gun gets knocked out of her hands. While she's trying to dodge the tentacle thing, Renelle picks up the gun and she's like, somebody please take this gun because I can't use it.
Yeah, that character was so fucking useful.
At which point, the tentacle grabs hold of her head and within a nanosecond pulls her through the pipe as we watch the camera follow the pipe really quickly. And then our actors reveal their facial response to what they've just witnessed. And it's all just blank faces. Like, Big G doesn't even care. He just goes in and punches Svet in the face.
He sort of liked her. And they were trying to build a relationship between those two. But none of it worked.
No.
None of it worked. And again, as we said, so the Russians knew what they sent up in space, or kind of had an idea. It crashed. And the ships, for some reason, the pod had started to send a signal. So the Russians deployed all these agents to a load of fishing vessels. Though they knew where the signal was, they just sent people to all these vessels.
In the hopes that one of them would be drawn to it.
And let's be clear, we haven't explained how badly weird it is where the whales are drawn to the signal, apparently. And the girl wakes up in the middle of... Sadie wakes up in the middle of the night when they're fishing, because they're going to do all the... they're going to do their exploring stuff during the day, looking for whales. But she wakes up in the middle of the night and notices her whale tracker's gone off. And she goes, oh, the whales are right underneath us. So she runs outside, where they're crabbing. and the whales are looking at a bleeping thing that's right next to the ship in an iceberg, which, again, my brain hurt at this point because I was like, okay, that's stuck in a lump of ice the ship's right next to, and it's just, is it floating there next to them, or is it stuck in a wall of ice? None of it made any sense at that point. No. The whole idea of how, it's too much coincidence. Too much coincidence. You need believability to any narrative, just a little bit. I mean, that's the thing. You can suspend disbelief to some extent, but
you do need a string of coincidences, I guess, to move the plot along. But when they are so obvious and blatant
and up front, and again, they're not weaving them into a longer narrative. They just front load them, and then I was like, okay, now I'm finding out Sflet knew that this signal was in this area, and what they thought, the ship's radar wasn't picking it up. It was just a bleeping light that the whales found, that the girl looking for whales spotted while looking for whales.
Yeah. Yeah, well, if you can swallow that, you can swallow this next effect, where we have a pair of legs walking along the deck. Svet, who's being held back by Big G at this point, starts screaming as this creature emerges from the crotch area of these walking legs, which then pick up speed and run right at her and cart her off screen. We do see a flash of her being dragged away by the creature.
There's a lot of people being dragged away by the creature in this film. We'll be honest, a lot of people die off screen. And I mean a lot. All the way to the end of the film. It's kind of a bit of an in-joke almost, because...
Yeah, like Renelle, who got dragged through the pipes. Don't see her again. It was a pretty lame death. Roland, who got dragged underneath a pipe and there was a burst of blood. Yeah.
You didn't really see the gore. It was just...
Svet just got carted away by a pair of legs.
You do sort of see a monster return later. But
yes,
again, there's a few monster returns when they've been...
But this isn't the next part of the... This next part of the film is now just all padding, because they're like, oh, now there's explosives on the ship. We've got about half an hour to go and disarm them all. So you two go this way, we two go this way. Let's try and disarm the bombs.
But then there's no part of my brain that was like, why don't they just go to the lifeboats and abandon ship?
Right? At that point, that would have been the right thing to do. But he's just like, nobody's scuttling my ship. It's my ship. Nobody blows it up, especially not some Russian spy. So they go off and start disarming the bombs. And it's just another one of those tension building moments that's been created because of a naff plot line, where Sadie's just like, oh, there's 3 bombs down here and I've got to get into the water. Oh no, the creature's in the water because it can move from liquid to solid form. She accidentally drops one of the bombs into the water and she's got to fish it out and pretend that she's terrified. And then they drop a rope and they fish her out.
Let's be gentle. The acting in this film is not of the highest caliber.
At all.
Lance Henriksen is...
He's the only one elevating it. And he elevates everybody else's performances that he's around when he's on screen.
Yeah.
But when he's not around, you're like, oh my God. It's terrible.
Yeah, I feel bad for Lance Henriksen. I wish he had better jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he did this partly because it was a fan film and he'd worked with these guys before on other films.
Yeah. But it's also during this point that they discover that all the crabs that they'd harvested have all been consumed, and that this creature is just accelerating its biomass by consuming as many things as it can. So that when it does make its reveal, you can see that it's a big, giant sock puppet. Sorry, I don't want to be cruel to it, but it was the camera work was so shaky. The lighting was so poor. I couldn't really make out what I was looking at.
It's a thing rising from a ship model at the finale, and it's got a little bit of the tardigrade look to it, and I'm like, this is just silly. Because water bears are a very cute amoeba. I mean, not amoeba, a microorganism. They are a really cute little microorganism that looks like a little water bear. It's very cute, and it's an odd choice because they didn't really make out how cute they were. And this is the problem when you've kind of got a science team looking for whales, and it's about a Russian experiment on water bears, and you don't really have time to kind of juxtapose these two kind of cute creature into a monstrous creature. It's the kind of Gremlins factor. You had time to kind of make a factor of going, look how cute he is, and then look how horrifying these are. And it's just like, okay, I can. That in itself is a little bit more of the horror aspect, where you convert something from cute to horrible. In this, it's just the whole film's horrible. I don't like this film. The more you make me think about it,
well, in what serves as a penultimate anti-climax.
5 seconds, pop up, take cover!
And there was no music over this part either, and so you're just like...
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, if they were 3 explosives meant to scuttle a ship, you'd assume they'd have the power to do a lot of damage to the ship. No.
No.
They make a cool ship model and then don't at least blow some bits of it up.
Well, they blew a hole in it, and that was about it.
Yeah,
but then Graf realizes that he's got some of the gunk on his face, and so that it's not going to be long before he dies from the infection
Rest
or
in peace,
mutates
Pop
or
Pop.
whatever. So he sends Big G off to go and fix the axle, and the others are just there to monitor him and make sure he doesn't turn.
Yeah.
So we follow him down into the engine room. He's cranking up the thing. I do like the effect where we get to see the Svet monster slowly lowering itself down in the background, being a stealth agent, which eventually attacks him, impales him right through the back, through the chest, which doesn't really seem to slow him down at all.
I guess they didn't know how to act being impaled. But
No.
again...
But then again, he then grabs hold of the Svet monster and they disappear into a quick bloodshot. It's like, okay. It's...
Yeah, no, I this is the... I had to retake some of these. Rewind and watch it again. Because some of them you just didn't believe they'd done that. And it's like they were making a PG film here.
Yeah.
And then they were... And that it didn't make any sense. I mean, I guess maybe they wanted to try to get to a bigger audience as possible and make some money back. But the problem is, these sorts of films are best when you embrace the genre. I think, and it also covers for you. I mean, the blood effects often, I think, would inspire the actors to rise to the moment. Not knowing how injured you are and, like, humans see blood, they recoil. Even the toughest are like, oh, I'm bleeding. I need to do something. And if they see fake blood, it's going to still trigger that kind of primal panic, primal response to kind of cope with the effect. I just don't feel any of it had that. The actors didn't know what was really going on. Stage direction was a little bit off, I think. I mean, Henriksen, as we said, he carries the show because I think certain actors are going to be skilled and veteran enough to work with what they've got and raise the caliber of a average to poor script.
Yeah.
Like we said, the effects are really good for the most part. I think they shoot a few of them wrong. The cinematography's off on the effects. The miniatures look good, but you get to the kind of end sequence which you were leading to.
Yeah. Well, they send, the creature reveals that it's still going, like it's hardly been affected by the brief explosion.
Yeah.
And Graf sends Sadie to go and ram the ship into the ice wall that's right in front of them, whilst he's asking Bowman to keep the gun on him and to hose him down. And before Bowman gets a chance to, he is also impaled through the back and out through the chest and dragged away while he still has that dumb look on his face.
Yeah, Bowman's and dies off screen.
Yes, again. But at least there's another blood splat on the wall where he came from.
This is a problem that occurred to me only with Sadie when she was in the control room because and you never see what happens to Pop Pop, Lance Henriksen's character.
Well, he's kind of left at the bottom of the stairs with the gun, blasting the tentacles that are all over him, and again, that's the last we see of him too.
Yeah, there's a lot of off-screen death, and this is and then Sadie's on the bridge, trying to steer the ship, and then there's tentacles, which unfortunately at this point become farcical because having live-action tentacles is cool.
Especially when they're directed. When they're just flopping around like a fish out of water.
She clambers out of a window with a floppy tentacle just doing this next to her. And I'm like, this is farce.
Yeah.
And at that point I was like...
This is the ending of your film here.
Yeah, and the problem is then she jumps out onto the ice, which they're next to, which I wasn't sure they were next to, but they are next to. None of this makes any sense. But the ship then plows through the ice into a big wall of ice that collapses on the ship. Maybe sinking it, maybe getting it stuck. It doesn't seem very fine, and none of it makes any sense. And she's sitting there on the ice, looking pretty much like she did in the first shot of the film, and then delivers the final line of the ship.
Yeah, the Coast Guard are just like, hey, mate, we received a mayday. And she's like, yeah, Harbinger down. It's like, oh, you dropped the film title right at the end.
They should have just called it Harbinger. Me and Gary discussed this, and we were like, just call it Harbinger. You didn't need, and like it's the Prometheus, it's the aliens.
Just name it after the ship, yeah, Event Horizon, you know. But it's just
damn it, it's not mentioning great films.
it's just it's homaging the Thing, but you should have just left her in the ice to freeze to death. But I was just like, who is receiving this mayday? I don't know where the hell you are. I don't know how they're going to get to you in time before you do freeze to death.
And she's laying on loose sea ice.
There was that whole subplot of the submarine that was nearby. I fully expected them to escape on that submarine and the creature to follow in there for the sequel or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it was just such a... Okay, it's over. And it wasn't a big spectacle ending. It wasn't exciting. It was an anti-climax. It was just a dud.
It's better than... it's better than like a lot of TV horror movies, sci-fi style, but it's not... It's not...
good.
No, and that's the problem. I want it to be good.
So, Jess, what are your favourite and least favourite scenes in the film?
Well, we got to say, I like the miniature work, and I mean, it's all very believable. I mean, the backburster is cool, but as I said, you hold a shot for too long of that size, and again, you compare it to the Alien chest burster, not to muddle those two films. It was smaller, it was bloodier, it was a more controlled and clever animatronic, should we say, in the way they designed that, and it was shot, so you got a close-up on it, and that was all really nicely done. In this, it's too grand for too long, and that's an issue for me. But it's still the coolest in terms of memorable monsters. I mean, Svetlana was a cool monster, but
yeah,
I did feel that was the best shot. The money shot, should we say.
Sure. And your least favourite, Jess?
The opening, I think. The script writing was off, the cinematography was off, the switching of... The thing is, like you said, you may have wanted the setup with the Russian shuttle, but that felt like it was shot totally differently to then the free cam bit in the car, and then immediately go to more of a steady cam, classically shot kind of film production in the ship, and it's jarring, and you're like,
I agree.
They don't quite know what they're doing with their cinematography. There's no unified vision. There are much better films on a more controlled budget in horror that have got fantastic cinematography. Even some of the more classic kind of older, if we go all the way back to Hammer horror films, they're classically shot, they're composed in a more classic manner. Blair Witch did irreparable harm by having a free kind of wobbly cam gibberish, because people think when you can't quite see what's going on, that works. The ship does that now and then, and it's erratic when they do it in the film. You just want to compose your shots beautifully. Like the bit where he bursts from the back, if you think about Alien, that was composed and there were multiple shots of that.
Well, this is the thing I've always said, that I love practical creature effects, and the teams that make them are experts at doing it. It's very, very rare when special effects teams write and direct their own movie. You know, they don't have that polish that John Carpenter or Ridley Scott will put into their set and their direction and the camera movement and placement and lighting. Like, those two directors are fantastic at that.
They also have their cinematography team, because you've got to remember,
Yes.
this is something we don't always talk about, and I don't think anyone really does in a lot of film reviews. The team behind a director is often a team that's worked with them for years.
Yes.
So they'll have their preferred cinematographer, they'll have their preferred set designer, they'll have their preferred team. And the studio, like this practical effects team, they'd probably go, I need my practical effects, I'll go to these guys to do this part. And so you end up with films that are crafted lovingly, but are crafted with a certain amount of formula to them. It's the Scorsese's the same. You see, even though it's not horror, the genre's different. You see these directors kind of pull their team back together and do one film, and it echoes the others because you can tell the polish is there from.
Well, I also
veterans.
think that those veteran directors have a vision, whereas these directors have an idea for a creature,
and they're borrowing,
they're
borrowing
the vision from the greats, and it clearly pales in comparison.
And that's a problem. Homage is fine if you can't do it justice, you probably don't want to draw such a stark comparison like this film does,
Right.
which is the major issue, I think. You're like,
Yeah.
oh, you're referencing the date of this, which is okay, you're making it very clear. And she's a lone survivor, lone female survivor, very alien.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so
Well, I found some of the scenes in the film memorable. I like the backburster, and I really, I mean, this is another reference to another film, but I like it when Lance Henriksen comes out, Graf comes out, and he's like, "You're going to need a bigger bucket." I cringed at the thought that they made
dear.
Lance Henriksen give that line. At the same time, I'm just like, yeah, it's fine. It's kind of funny. Like, needed a little bit of moment of levity after that disturbing, memorable sequence. I also quite liked Atka being eaten by the shark monster. I thought that creature was also very well done. I liked all the layers of teeth and its translucent kind of skin, the tentacles coming out. I thought that was quite well done. And I also quite liked the Svet monster as well. As well as I enjoyed some of those monster effects and creatures, there's a few things that really annoyed me with the film, and one of them, other than the poor cinematography and shaky cam stuff, was the sound effects. And the lack of music in certain sequences, which I really just left certain scenes hanging.
Move! Come on, Sadie! Sadie!
But for me, one of the most frustrating or one of the most aggravating sounds in the film was the sound of hatch doors and doors opening. That exact same screeching sound effect is used throughout the entire film. So other than those horrible sounds, the worst scene I think in the film is when Sadie gets hold of the radio because the Russians on the submarine are radioing in to find out what happened to Svet, and she starts screaming down the radio.
Alive. We're alive. So fuck you and your little experiment. We're still alive. We're alive. We're still alive.
It was just awful, an awful performance, awfully acted. I think it's more obvious considering how bored and expressionless most of the characters have been up until that sudden outburst. It's just no. It was just awful.
And again, there's no real heartbreak for it. Let's be clear. Sadie is the main character. There's some story between her and her grandfather. It's not well explored. It's not well explained. She doesn't express anything.
You could cut it out of the film and not lose anything.
Yeah, her expression at the end of the film isn't that different from her expression at the start of the film. She's pretty much the same throughout this whole film. And that's same for almost everybody. I know it's all shot in one night, and it's very much a kind of one and done adventure within a very short window of time. But again, the Russians talked over the mic. It leads to nothing. It doesn't serve a purpose, and that's the biggest issue. There's no emerging Russian submarine at any point in the close. It's just Sadie laying on an iceberg sort of pack. Again, if you understand, I don't know quite what she's laying on, and I don't know quite how she's going to be picked up by this Coast Guard that are talking to her on this radio, because she has no flares. I mean, none of it made any sense. Not a single thing at that point. And that's the problem. The close of that film was awful. Like the beginning and most of the middle.
So, Jess, do you recommend Harbinger Down?
No. I mean, if you've got a lot of time to kill and we're still in lockdown and you've watched every other film under the sun, sure. But that's probably unlikely. So, no, I wouldn't. I mean, it's if you're interested in seeing what they did, you could skim through it. I mean, you're not going to miss much. The plot is ropey. The monsters are good now and then. Like I said, I think they hang on them a little too long. So I think there's a trick with, like, in other films where you kind of see just enough that your brain registers it, but then you cut away to a response from an actor, but none of the actors could act, so none of the responses are worth going away to. So I guess they had to keep just looking at their wonderful animatronics and stuff. So yeah, if you really want to see some cool looking stuff in the form of like monsters, just jump to those bits.
Skim through the film.
Skim through the film. Say hi to Lance Henriksen, and then turn it off.
I want to be heavy-handed in my criticisms for the film, but I still somewhat recommend Harbinger Down. It's a low-budget creature feature, and they did an outstanding job with very little. The creature effects, the animatronics, the prosthetic makeup, the stop motion, and miniature effects, to me, were all fantastic, very effective, very creative, and it is the highlight of the film. The biggest problem with the film is the characters either being poorly acted or just poorly written. The crew of the Harbinger are just fodder for the monster, and it's really only Lance Henriksen who elevates the performances in the film to a tolerable level, from the blank line deliveries and vacant expressions from the rest of the crew. The story is unoriginal, but the location at least is different, while retaining the similar harsh settings of the claustrophobic corridors with poor lighting, which help build the rising tension and atmosphere as things escalate. The camera work is also a pretty mixed bag, with some decent cinematography, presenting the low light level moments and the creepy details, but it's also really sloppy in places with too much shaky camera work. This is an average horror film at best. I was fairly disappointed and found the film to be mostly forgettable, especially when you compare it to its major influences. But as a fan, I appreciate the nods to those films, and, I have to remember that this was on a budget. It's cheap, it's tacky, but it has some very watchable moments, let down by quite a few key elements. I would say it's still at least worth a watch.
Except one. Harbinger Down.
Thanks for watching Off the Shelf Reviews.